Okay, I think I'm gonna go ahead and get started. It is 10 and we might have a couple other people popping in. So first of all, welcome to the new normal. I know we're all adjusting. This is my first time doing a training by Zoom, so we'll see how it goes. You may notice that I have you all muted when you signed in, and also your cameras are off. You can control the camera if you would like for me to see you, that's fine. Personally, when I've done webinars, I prefer to not have my camera on if I'm just in the audience, because I think you can, if you have to use the bathroom or whatever, you have privacy. So anyway, I also have Sylvia Gill is on. She's my manager at the Daniel Jordan Fiddle Foundation Transition and Adult Programs at UM-NSU CARD. And so the way we're going to work it today, because of how difficult things are with Zoom for conversations, is that I'm going to go through the PowerPoint and just talk for the bulk of the morning. And if you have questions that arise, I really encourage you to either write them down for yourself. We will have probably about 15 minutes at the end for some live Q&A if you want, and discussion. And then, or you can use the chat. So if all of you are familiar with Zoom, hopefully you've been using it already, there is a chat button in your, it's usually at the bottom of the screen. So in the chat, you can write any questions that occur to you as we're going along, and Sylvia or Cece is going to be kind of monitoring the chat. So anyway, I am Jennifer Feinstein, and I'm a case manager at UM-NSU CARD. And like I said, we're the Daniel Jordan Fiddle Foundation Transition and Adult Programs. My focus is on employment. So I work with adults with autism who are looking for work or employed, and I offer them extra support and links to resources in the community. I also am a parent. My son is 24 years old and he has high functioning autism. He went to University of Alabama and graduated 2 years ago, and now he has entered the workforce at Baptist Health Systems. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. So let's get started. Here we go. So the things that we're really going to talk about today, I mean, really, this is obviously for job coaches. So I normally in a live meeting, I might find out, like, who do you work with? What's your experience? But so today we can't do that. So we're going to have an overview of autism, because I think it's important when you're working with individuals with autism to kind of understand what the disability means and what are some of the challenges. We'll talk about the role of a job coach, workplace accommodations and supports for individuals with ASD, and then some self-advocacy and prompting. So the idea is to help you understand what to expect when you're working with individuals with autism, and then come up with understand the challenges and then come up with some solutions and things you can do, or at least a guide for how to think about your interventions. So first, we're going to talk about Autism Spectrum Disorder, which we also abbreviate as ASD. So it's a developmental brain disorder. So it's called developmental. That means it develops across the lifespan. So it emerges in early childhood, and sometimes it's diagnosed in early childhood and sometimes it's not. We work with individuals who are diagnosed as adults as well. And it significantly impacts the social skills, the communication, and the behavior. And really, it's a lifelong disorder. There's not a cure. So we're not looking for cures. When we're working with individuals with autism, we're helping support them and helping them so that they can function better. And so it's considered to be a spectrum. So I like to talk about this a little bit so that people are not confused, because the diagnostic terminology has changed over the last few years, and sometimes it can be confusing. So in the past, the DSM is what psychologists use. It's a manual that they use for diagnosis. So in the past, the disorder, they had a category of pervasive developmental disorders, and autism was considered one diagnosis, along with a couple others that you've probably heard: Asperger's syndrome, or PDD-NOS, which stands for pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. So those were the old names, and now the DSM-5, the most recent version of the DSM, has changed it to be Autism Spectrum Disorder, and they give levels of functioning. So now we don't have these different names for diagnoses, but it's all considered ASD. So if you meet somebody and they say, because people still use the older terminology, especially we find that individuals who are very verbal that would have been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in the past, they have an identity around being an ASPI. They call it ASPI. So you might meet people who tell you, my diagnosis is Asperger's syndrome. And that's okay. That I always tell people they own it, so they can say it however they want. But for you, you will know that that means they have autism. So it's, you can just consider all of those to be autism. So these are the main areas that are affected for autism. And you can see it's a social communication and interaction can have, and you see how there's circles, and not the entire circle is not included in autism. And that really represents that there's a variety of symptoms within these categories, and to varying degrees. So social communication and interaction, and then restricted and repetitive behaviors. And depending on the level of functioning, those can be behaviors, they can be interests, ideas that the person might be kind of restricted to talking about if they're very verbal. And then you can see at the bottom, the expressive language level goes all the way. The spectrum includes all levels of expressive language, meaning some people might be nonverbal and some people could be very verbal, which this slide kind of shows that it really is truly a spectrum. It can make it difficult for people to understand. So if you met two people on the opposite ends of the spectrum, it would they would not seem very related. But when you look at those social communication, if you look at those categories, you can see how they are related to each other. So on the one end, you might have individuals who are nonverbal. Maybe they're socially isolated. They might interact more with objects than people. And then they may or may not have intellectual impairments also. And then at the far other end, which is on the right on this slide, you might have individuals who are incredibly verbal, and maybe they don't stop talking, or they are social. Sometimes it's a misnomer. People say, oh, well, they have autism, they're not social. That's not true. They might be very social, meaning they want friendships, but maybe they're socially awkward. They're not good at it, maybe. And then they might be focused on certain topics. And so on that end, you might find individuals who are intellectually gifted. So, and then in the middle, we have a super broad range of individuals who have some language, they have inconsistent interest in being social, and maybe their cognitive skills are uneven. And I would say that one of the big challenges for people with autism is uneven skill development. So that means they're good at some things and they're not so good at other things. And sometimes it's surprising when you meet people. And so here again is just kind of the different symptoms and how you can see them on the spectrum. So it makes things complicated, and it makes it complicated for people to diagnose and to understand autism. But you can see the IQ, social skills, communication, motor skills could all be almost anywhere on the spectrum. It's a wide, wide range. But these are areas that you might think of when you're working with your clients that could be potential challenges for them, including motor skills. And I know, when we talk a little bit more, I'll talk about different things that you might look for on the job, because it's really important to just kind of be able to identify where are the challenges for this person. So just how common is it? It's this slide says 1 in 59, but I do believe there was a new article that's 1 in 54 children meet the criteria for ASD. So that's a 13% increase since 2016, and it still is more prevalent in boys, 5 times more likely, but also girls are less likely to be diagnosed. So we're not sure that that means it's necessarily there's more boys who actually have ASD, or they're just not as frequently diagnosed. I mean, they're more frequently diagnosed. And then it cuts across racial, social, ethnic classes. So everyone does. Although white children are more likely to be identified and diagnosed. So, and again, they can actually start diagnosing as early as 18 months. And then by 2 years, they can get a pretty good diagnosis, but most people aren't diagnosed until after age 4. So let's talk about some of the challenges that you have seen. I know a lot of you are, I can see from your emails that many of you work already in the field and probably have worked with a lot of people with autism. So I'm sure you've noticed some of these challenges. But so receptive and expressive language can be a challenge. Expressive is what you're able to say, receptive is what you're taking in. And so that's an area where you really can, try to understand your person, your individual that you're working with. Social communication, both verbal and nonverbal, can really be a challenge, including body language, which can actually interfere with people's relationships and their success at work. So they may have restricted and repetitive behaviors. I think the classic that people see and talk about is the hand flapping, but you will see you may see other behaviors as well from individuals. Executive functioning can be a really big challenge, and that's a place where I think as job coaches, I think it's really important for you all to understand and then, start to develop a plan to help. But executive functioning is your ability to plan, sequence, follow through with something so that you can do a behavior. So that is something that is a big challenge for our guys with ASD. And it interferes obviously throughout school. We can usually see that. And then when you get on the job as well, it can be a struggle. And then this is a big one also to remember: difficulty with change. So we're going to see when we talk about interventions that creating routines and structure will be really important. And then another one to remember is sensory processing issues. Many individuals are hypersensitive. They're usually the easier ones to identify. And so things that you may not notice, like fluorescent lights make a hum. And so some people are very sensitive to that sound. They're hypersensitive. But we also have people who are hyposensitive, meaning they're less sensitive, and they may not notice pain. They may not be aware that, there's something seriously wrong in their body, and then that can cause problems with them. So these are all areas that you're going to, when you're meeting someone and you're starting working up with them, these are areas that you're going to think about, you're going to want to think about for the challenge, so you can understand the challenges and then come up with maybe some solutions. And then of course, many areas of strength for our guys, and I know you're job coaches, and so you all, I think, are probably in this because you have a belief that every person has something to offer the world and that everyone can work. That's Albert Einstein, who many people say have autism. And then underneath, that's me and my son, TJ, when he graduated from high school. So I just wanted to put that in there. So anyway, some of the areas of strength are visual processing can be strong, attention to detail. And I want to say a caveat, and because you saw those charts with all the different areas, and I'm sure you're getting the idea that every single person who has autism is different. So when we say strengths, it's not to assume that everyone you meet has these strengths, because I have run into someone who was going to hire someone with autism who had a college degree, and yet she struggled with attention to detail. And so she had a job where she was going to be doing data entry, and it was a real struggle. And part of that was because the person made an assumption. Oh, autism with college, they're attentive to detail. So that's not always the case. Memory can be an amazing strength, memory of information, in particular, dates. Academics is often an area of strength. And then they also, some individuals with autism will have a high level of interest in a specific area. So that can be a real strength, especially if it can be related to the job that they have. And they tend to be logical, rule-oriented. So as an employee, I know you all can imagine if you're an employee who's rule-oriented and following the rules, that might make you a really good employee. Honest and loyal, and many of our guys have advanced vocabularies. But again, it depends. And so this is something that we say, I don't know if you've heard this before, but if you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism. And hopefully now that we've talked about it, you can understand why, because of the broad range of symptoms and the levels that differ from person to person. So it's very important when you meet someone to take an individual approach when you're assessing them. So let's talk a little bit about the role of a job coach. And, you know, obviously, most of you hopefully are job coaches, so you know that it's a person employed to help people with disabilities learn, accommodate, and perform their work duties. And the role is not necessarily to teach the person, the role as we see it, it's not necessarily to teach that person how to do their job. They have bosses, they have training, but it's to help identify strategies and methods that can allow them to be successful and be valued. And really, when people are working, it's about their value that they can bring to the company. So I think the more advanced preparation you can do, the better. And so that involves, you know, understanding your client and maybe thinking about them and trying to understand where their challenges come in, the ones that we just talked about, and how do they express themselves for this individual. You also, I think it's super important to understand the requirements of the work environment and the job so that you can help prepare that person. Set some expectations with the person, and of course with the employer, if it's possible to carve. You know, many of our individuals, I know there's a wide range, and I'm sure you've worked at people with varying levels, whether they're in competitive employment or customized employment where you're really carving. But sometimes a lot of our guys need some carving, even if they're at the competitive level and the high functioning autism. And then you're going to want to set up systems that will help that person be able to complete their task, even if you're not there. So of course, I think you know, as we said, you're going to start by observing their abilities and the challenges and things that need improvement. You know, there may be skills that you need to work on beforehand that maybe you didn't expect. Like the young lady that I was talking about before, one of the first things that she had difficulty with was logging into the computer. And so now this is somebody who completed a college degree, but when I observed her trying to log in, I could see that what she was doing was trying to hit, to make the capital letters, she was hitting the shift and the letter at the same time. So like, boom, you know, and we all know you have to hold the shift and then hit the letter. So I had to coach her through that a little bit. And that was something that if I hadn't, you know, observed, because I was just getting reports, she does not logging in. This is the 10th time that we've had this problem. So if I hadn't observed that, then I wouldn't have known what the problem was. So sometimes you have to look for those things and really just observe them to see. And then also, you know, you're going to see like a lot of our suggestions are really about building systems. In particular, people with autism respond well to visuals. So you're going to build these systems so that you're going to fade yourself. And we all know that, you know, as job coaches, you're not there forever, especially with funding these days. And so you want to build systems for them. And we'll talk about task analysis, and we'll talk about fading the supports too. So when we talk about accommodations, I'm sure all of you are aware of this, but I like to just talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act for a second. It's what really protects people with disabilities. And of course, the relevant part for businesses and for employees to know is that they're not allowed to discriminate against someone who can perform the essential function of the job with or without reasonable accommodations. So that's where you all come in. Job coaches are an accommodation. And actually, most of the suggestions that we have for working with people with autism are accommodations that are very reasonable and really low cost. Because they involve like taking pictures and making charts, you know? And so anyway, so that's just so that we all know that we're on the same page with this, with the law, that these people are entitled to some coverage. So setting expectations, you know, these are some basic questions, but these are questions that our autistic individuals tend to struggle with. They don't necessarily come in with this knowledge of what the unwritten work curriculum is. You know, we all sort of know, we have some expectations for what's going to happen at work and what we need to do. And a lot of times our individuals, they don't have that. They also may not really be that motivated to work. You know, my son actually will say, if you're like, do you want to work? He'll be like, no, I don't want to work. Like he'd much rather sit at home on his computer and play his games, right? So we have to work on some of that motivation as well, because if you're not really that motivated to work, are you really going to be that motivated to like do the tasks you're supposed to do when you're at work? So those are some questions. So what do I have to do? How much do I have to do? When do I start? So starting and stopping can be struggles. So helping that person identify like how to get started and then what happens next. And then what do I do when I'm done? You may need to talk about what can you say and what shouldn't you say? What happens if there's a problem? Who can you ask for help? How do you ask for help? Also, what about breaks? When can you take a break? You know, most of us might just figure out what break time is, or we kind of know that like, all right, well, you know, I'm going to go take a break for a minute and get some coffee. But somebody with autism might need concrete, clear set guidelines and maybe even like a scheduled break so that they can do the same thing every day. So we also want to really communicate with that person and engage them. You know, ask for their input. Find out what is the experience for them as much as they're able to communicate that with you. We're going to talk a little bit more about self-advocacy, but, you know, as an adult in the world, being able to advocate for yourself is incredibly important. When you're communicating, you always want to be clear, literal, and precise. We always recommend doing both verbal and written instructions because people who have difficulty with executive functioning and a communication disorder, just having verbal instructions might be difficult for them. Give guidance on how to handle problems. You know, what can they say? Who can they say it to? You know, how to ask for a break, how to interrupt your boss. When we work with our individuals, we always talk about what if you need to say something to your boss and you walk by his office and the boss is on the phone. So just think in your head, like how long, what would you do if the boss is on the phone and they don't see you, they're just on the phone. So how long do you stay there? Is it okay to say hello? Is it okay to knock? Then what do you do? What about the scenario where you go to your boss's office and they're on the phone, but they see you and they go like this, they go like that. Okay, so now they've told you just a minute, so it's okay for you to stand there, but how long are you going to stand there? Because maybe many of us can know a time where the boss did that and then all of a sudden their phone call took longer. So, you know, we get people answering like, oh, maybe 15 minutes. Well, no, you don't want to stand outside someone's door for 15 minutes. So anyway, so these are all things that you might want to discuss and consider. Also, coping strategies. So what do you do if you get frustrated at work? Are there things that help you calm down in the past? So do you like to listen to music? Is this a workplace where you can wear headphones? Can you use a squeezy ball? Can you take a break? If you are feeling incredibly anxious and frustrated, could you walk outside for a walk for 5 minutes? You know, what are the coping strategies that the individual has used in the past? And then how does that merge with their job? And then when you're communicating behavioral expectations, you may need to provide an explanation. And for some individuals with autism, it's really going to be important for them to have a reason. So it's not just the old, well, that's just the way it is. You know, of course, we don't talk when the boss is talking, or whatever the rule is that you're explaining to them. But many of our individuals with autism actually need to have an explanation and a reason before they'll buy into it. And that's okay. But we want you to know, like, it's better to give explanations and take that extra time rather than getting into like a headbutting, well, just because I said so situation. And then, of course, we want to use visuals and verbal communication. So we're going to talk about visuals as well. So again, we're always keeping in mind, you know, all those challenges that we just talked about autism, and keeping in mind what's their ability. So you have to do some assessment. What is the environment they're working on and the supports that might be available? What are the time constraints? What are the goals of your program? What are the goals of the workplace? You know, what are we trying to achieve? And then always remembering that there may be skills that are missing that you might need to teach someone. Can they cut things? Like, because some people have fine motor difficulties, you know, that could be an issue that you might run into. So it's really good to assess those things. So for the workspace and environment, obviously this is different for every person and every workspace, but generally speaking, if there can be a workspace with limited distractions, that's going to be the best. We had a complaint about a worker who was at Baptist in the cafeteria, and really great worker cleaning the tables, but you know, they have the TVs on in the cafeteria, and he would get distracted and they would find him just standing and watching TV. It wasn't that he was, you know, just wanting to slack off. He would get incredibly distracted by the TV. So that's a case where if you can work with the company about how to handle that. Can the TV be off when it's his turn to work, or, you know, have somebody monitor? Could he have a reminder, like maybe a buzzer to remind him? You know, that requires some, you know, thinking for that. And then the office supplies. So this is another one that I think we don't always think about, but if you think about when you start, let's say you have a client who's working in an office job. And when I started my office, you know, there's certain things I have in my brain that I'm going to need at my desk. And I know that somebody at the office knows where these supplies are kept, and they would want me to have them. But someone with autism doesn't necessarily know that. They're not necessarily going to be aware that, okay, you know, my running list would be like scissors, a stapler, tape, pens, whiteout, you know, a staple remover maybe, you know, depending on what you're doing. But that's not going to be something that everyone with autism is necessarily going to know. So if you can help them find out what that procedure is to set up their space. And then, of course, the sensitivities that we talked about. So these are things like if you're seeing somebody having a struggle, you might need to go through this list in your brain. Like, what are the possibilities here? Is there a sensitivity issue? Are there loud noises that happen nearby? You know, are there odors? That's another one. People can be very sensitive to odors. So again, it's taking those things that you now know about autism and applying them to every situation. So one of the big supports that's helpful for almost everyone with autism and almost everyone as a person is using visuals. So what visuals do, and visuals are really just pictures, and it can be writing even, like a list, that really help you give structure to what the individual is going to be doing at work, gives them their expectations for the day. They can help reduce anxiety because they know what to expect. They have a representation of maybe what they're going to be doing. It minimizes their cognitive effort. So if you have a list, a chart, pictures of what is going to happen, you don't have to constantly think about what are you going to do next. And all of those things will help increase their independence. So if you can, on the front end, create some visuals that have a support for that person's day, then they can function without you because they will have their visuals to work with. So, so how do you do it? You know, of course, you know, a lot of these interventions really require just getting organized on the front end. You know, just decide how their day is going to run. So that might be working with the supervisor to learn more about what the times are and how, you know, what the structure of their day is going to be. Make sure you're scheduling breaks, and then you're going to develop your visuals. So you might be taking, we're going to have some examples in a second, but you might take pictures, you know, and you might need to do a task analysis, which we're also going to go through. And then you want to schedule some time for that person to kind of monitor themselves. How are they doing? Like, how do they think they're doing? So task analysis is basically, it's taking any task that needs to be done and breaking it down into step-by-step instructions. So you're breaking it down into a way that the person can understand and follow those instructions. And if you need to, you can even reinforce individual steps once you have a task broken down. So really, they can help anyone and be used in almost any setting because you can have instructions on a little piece of paper. And we all use task analyses all the time. And one of the examples is recipes, instruction manuals, you know, IKEA, you know, there are booklets, which are kind of torture if you've ever done those, but you know, those are all task analyses. And the important thing is to try to get every steps that you don't even think of. Like if you're doing a recipe, for me, the best recipes are ones where they tell you information that maybe no other recipes tell you. So I make these really good chocolate chip cookies, and the recipe that I have tells you when you're creaming the butter and the sugar to do it for 5 minutes in the thing. So I've never seen that before. And let me tell you, those cookies are amazing, and they're like professional cookies. So anyway, so how to create a task analysis. Okay, so first you pick your task, and you're going to create a draft of what you think the steps are. You're going to look at your steps, and you're also going to look at the person and see, do you think they have the skills? Like, do they have all the skills necessary to complete the task? And then, so you observe the task, create the list of all the steps, and then test the task. You can try to, so if you've written up this task analysis, you should try to complete the task just using what you wrote, or have a friend, have someone you know do it, and just see, because what happens is we all miss steps. And sometimes they're important steps. I did one for my son to make spaghetti sauce, and he really didn't want to do it and hated it. And because I said, chop garlic, and I skipped the step of peel the garlic. So, and guess what? Peeling the garlic is the one that my son hates the most. So that's why it's really important to look at these task analysis, complete them all the way, and really try to pinpoint what you're missing. Then you're going to observe the individual, complete the task, and make notes. What are the challenges? What are the prerequisite skills? What has to be done before they start the task? Do they have to find a material first? You know, okay, well, that's going to tell you, you might need to, you know, put that in there. And then maybe you'll make edits and watch them running it again. I had worked at Subway with the client, and the owner was complaining. He was in the back, he worked in the back creating things, making the food, preparing. And so they complained that he knew how to do all the things, it's just that he wasn't cleaning his area in between. So I was like, well, how are you showing him what to do? So they didn't, I would have made a little more of a permanent one task analysis, but what they had, which was fine because he knew how to do these tasks already, was just like a little piece of paper, and they would write down what he had to complete for the day. So it would say like 5 tuna, 2 turkey. And so I was watching and I was like, well, do you know what that means? Like, do you know how to do the tuna? Do you know? And so he did. He knew where everything was. He had the skills to complete it and everything. But he would do his tuna, and then his list next said 2 turkeys. So then he would get the turkey. He would put away the tuna stuff and get out the turkey. But he was in trouble because he wasn't cleaning his area in between. So what would they have put on the task analysis? They should have put every time clean area. So many individuals work really well with a checklist too. And so you can just have it so they can check it off and keep track. So here's a little question for you to think in your head. If we were live, I would just be like, yell out the answers. What do you think? But if you, how many steps do you think you need to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? So if you just think up through like how many steps you think are needed for your task analysis. And here we go. The truth is 30 steps. So it's a lot, but that's what a task analysis is about. Breaking down the steps into the little tiny things that you and I know and we do automatically and we know how to do, but a person with autism might need it spelled out and they might need to be taught. So if you look at if you look closely at the task analysis, you know, these are the strategies on the one side, and then look at some skills, okay? So just to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, can your person twist? Can they physically open a jar? That's even, what about a new one? That's really hard. Do they know how to use a knife? I can't tell you how many, you know, I've been to a fun event where it was going to be about cooking, and it was for individuals with IDD, which is intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so they had a chef, they hired a chef. It was in the back of a restaurant, in the kitchen. But all of a sudden, they're like handing out knives to groups of individuals. And you could just see this moment where everyone's like, do they know how to use a knife? You know, so it's important to really assess, do they have the skills? So here's another example of a task analysis that you could find in an office. And trust me, having these things, if you take the time to print them out and put them on the wall, we usually laminate. We have like a little laminator machine, so we like to laminate things a lot. But if you take time to do this and put it in the beginning, it really helps everyone, and especially the individual. And so you can see they have all the steps, including pictures and words on what to do. Here's a great one for merchandise stocking. I really like this one. And so these are visuals. So you can see visuals are pictures, and excuse me, they have, each step has words. And you can imagine if you created this for your employee at their place of work, you could print it, laminate it, and then look, there's a check mark off. And so again, individuals with autism respond really well to checking things off. I mean, we all like to make a to-do list, and I like to check off what I've done. It makes you feel good. And so if you can give this to that person, it will really help them track what they've completed and where they have to go. And so here's another one with pictures and words on how to load a labeler, change an ink roller. You know, you can do it with almost anything. I actually love this. You know, if you're gonna create task analysis plus visuals, if you can really try to get a picture of each step, and you can see that they've really done this nicely, from starting with it as a square, the napkin, to all the way down to how to place it and getting all the pictures. If you're working with people in restaurants or merchandising, you know, situations, you can really see how these kind of visuals can be an excellent complement to their job. And then here is some visuals we just have at the card office. And you know, what you'll find, so we're an autism-friendly workplace. We not only are the Center for Autism, we have about 5 individuals with autism that work for us. And but having the workplace be friendly with visuals for people with autism is really great for all of us. And I'm sure Cece could also chime in and tell us that, you know, it's wonderful to know, like the sign in the middle, those are on our doors. So it says, I'm here, just knock. The one where it's in a meeting. So to know that somebody's not available and you don't want to disturb them is important. And it helps with people with some of that those social things too. So those are just some things to keep in mind. And then another type of a visual that can be really helpful are daily schedules. So I don't know if you have all looked in, Microsoft Office has a lot of templates, and they're interactive live templates that you can create. This is one of them, and then there's many, many, many different styles, from looking at a month, looking at a week, different ways to have like the reminders, and you can enter your information and change the calendar. So those can be really great for your individuals if you're working on helping them understand their schedule, their daily schedule. And of course, having a daily schedule is something we really recommend for people with autism. So giving instruction, we kind of talked about this before, but many times verbal instructions can be tricky. So for you as the job coach, or for the employer when you're working with the employers, this is one of the basic accommodations that we recommend almost all of our individuals with ASD request as an accommodation, which is just having instructions written as well as verbal. Again, checklists are great. That's awesome. And we encourage our individuals with that are a little bit higher functioning to, if they're in a situation and the boss is giving them instructions and it's not written, they can ask, do you mind if I write that down? So depending on their level, we want to either help them by having their employer provide instructions written. It could be an email. So if the boss has a long list of instructions, if they can just send it by email. Visuals, obviously we talked about that. Recorded instructions is also something to keep in mind. If there's a complicated situation, or for those merchandising kind of situations, recording the instructions can also be good. And it gives a person, the beauty of having things written and visual and even recorded is that it gives that person the ability to look at it again. And so I can't tell you how many times I've worked with individuals and I've been next to them at work where when they have a list, they will look at that checklist every time. And some of it is helping their anxiety. So they might know this might be a task they're doing, but it helps with the anxiety to just have it written down. So they just every time can read through it. So also when you're giving instructions, make sure that you're giving time for processing. Many of our adults with autism have a slow processing time. And so it's important to make sure they've understood before you move on to the next step. So slowing down, asking if they understood, check for comprehension, maybe ask them what to do next. And then if they're struggling with the directions, then maybe you need to modify what the directions are and how you're giving them. So we talked a little bit about routine, that individuals with autism really thrive on a routine and they have difficulty with change. So in the real world, you know, it's hard because we can make a schedule, we can make a plan, we can try to be structured, and all those things will help, right? But sometimes things change. So we do need to help that person learn to be flexible. And you can do that by talking about the possibility that there might be a change, and creating a backup plan. So like this example is just like, if there's a meeting at 1, but if that meeting is canceled, I will do this, like I will shred papers. Coming up with something they can do if things change. And helping them maybe say, you know, sometimes things change and that's okay. I would say that's a struggle for almost all levels of individuals with autism, all levels of functioning. Also preparing, think about things that might really change the schedule, like the holiday party or a retreat. So my son went on a retreat with Baptist, and you know, that was one of the things that he has a job coach also, by the way, I forgot to mention. And that was one of the things. So what his job coach did was called the boss and found out the details of the retreat, what to expect, what to wear, what's it going to be like, and then called my son and explained to him what to expect. And even sent it in an email with a list of what are the things that he could expect to experience at the retreat. And then also, like, what time can you leave? So my son struggles with wanting to leave earlier. And again, I want to reiterate, my son went to college and he even started a master's program. So very smart guy, but some of these, you know, these uneven developmental skills are really evident. So he wants to leave, you know, so that's a struggle. Anyway, again, having details, any details about the change. Also, you know, some people don't like joking and poking fun, but when you think about an office party, that's something that tends to be part of the program. You know, that's something that might happen. So you might need to prepare the person for how to handle that. Again, preparation and planning. So if you can really just see one of your roles as helping that person prepare for these social issues and for these changes, that can be great help. And then that goes nicely into the category of pro-social behaviors. You might have individuals that you're working with who, you know, may not say hi if someone says hi to them. You know, they might not respond appropriately if someone says hi to them. So I would say it would be perfectly reasonable for you to find yourself teaching appropriate greetings and maybe coming up with a way to manage the social anxiety, because many people don't say hi because they don't like that, you know, that's the unknown. Like if you talk to people, a lot of weird things can happen. Who knows? They could say something about the weather, or, you know, but you might have to work on coming up with how to be pro-social and appropriate while, you know, managing anxiety. So the other thing that, you know, so all the things in an office are things that you and I might know about or have other experiences, and our individuals might not. So again, sick and late policies also. What do you do if you're late? How do you get sick leave? What if you're sick? Who do you call? Or do you, like, we have to log into Workday. Does your person have to do that? And what are the policies? You know, can you get fired? If you're late, what happens to you? So that's important. Also, this is a big one, is helping clarify who are the other people around them at work. My son in particular doesn't always know who's who, and may not, you know, remember. He's obviously was introduced to everyone when he started, but, you know, he will be like, well, that's Liz. And I'll be like, well, what does Liz do? I don't know. So you might want to help them, because there can be a lot of social snafus if you don't know who's the boss, you know, and who's the coworker. We also have individuals who sometimes have difficulty taking instruction from someone if they're not the boss, right? So they know they have a supervisor, and then if you're the coworker who has more tenure, they may not want to listen to you, but they might need to. So you can create a chart. Like if you see the one we have here, it has pictures. I really like if you can help them create one with pictures. But even if it has to just be names, if you can't get the pictures of everyone, but so that they know, like, who's who to go to, and then be clear, how does the chain of command work, and be consistent. Who can give them instructions? Who should they listen to? And where do they go for help? And then team gatherings, you know, obviously the person needs to know, are they invited? You know, if there's a holiday party, should they go? They're not going to necessarily pick up on that. So you want to just think about all those places. And of course, always we want to be careful and aware if there's any bullying or alienation going on. And it does happen even though we're all adults and in workplaces. So asking for help is a big skill. And when we do our program, we run a program called Job Seekers, which is for individuals who are looking for work, and we work on a lot of work-related skills. And one of the things that we find is that people are reluctant to ask for help. They have a feeling like it's negative, that you look like you don't know what you're doing, or you're weak, or you're, shouldn't have been hired, or whatever. So, but really when you're at work, asking for help is a crucial skill. So it's something that we really recommend that you work on teaching them, because as we talked about earlier, it's important to know to ask for help, but then it's also important to know how to ask for help and who do you ask for help. We always encourage maybe having a role play, a script for like how to ask for help or what to do if you need help. And we always try to reinforce that, which would it be better if let's say you are doing a job in the morning and you don't want to ask for help. So you keep doing that job wrong all day. So is it better to ask for help and so then the boss knows you didn't know how to do it, but they tell you the right way, or is it better to do it wrong all day? So obviously, that's one of the things we work on with people. And then problem solving is, is a skill. And so asking for help is part of problem solving. And it's also part of self-advocacy. So if you have time to work with them, I know many of you have some employment training. These are good skills that you can work on teaching that can help them in their employment. So these are just a variety of problem solving worksheets that you can use, your choices. It's about what's the problem, thinking what could you do, and then thinking about what might happen. I kind of like this one also because you can help a person think about different solutions and then think about the consequences, because everything you do has a consequence. So, and then pick the one and why did you pick that one? And again, same kind of thing. This one goes a little bit deeper into sort of that cognitive behavioral thoughts and feelings and then behaviors, which is always important to help people think through. So, I'm sure you all in your work have run into behavior challenges, and you will if you haven't. It's important to address them and come up with a plan. So I think taking breaks is always important. Reminding the client about how to take a break, finding out from their boss if you're assessing the employment, what do they do if they're frustrated? Our autistic adults can have frustration from all the challenges that we talked about, sensory, change, all those different things. So they may suffer from frustration, and they might need to have something to do. So can they take a break? Can they use a calming activity? You might want to help that adult, like when you first get started and you're doing your assessments, come up with the things that they like, that help them calm down, to be calm, and to handle stressful moments. And you're going to do that before the things happen. So when somebody is freaking out and upset on a job site because of whatever happened, that's not a good time to be like, what do you like to do when you're in this situation? So that's a crisis time, and that person might have to remove and then go back when they can. But really the best case scenario is to develop these things ahead of time. And again, you always want to be clear. You want to have a system if you can, and a procedure, and work between the employee and the employer with some of those issues. The other thing that tends to be a difficulty for behaviors are if there are activities that the person doesn't like to do, that they have to do as part of their work. And you'll see this, it's different for everyone, as we talked about. But some people might not like repetitive tasks that seem overwhelming. Like if you give them a big stack, they might not like that. They might like repetitive tasks, but maybe not to see a big stack, whatever it is. So you can, if you can identify when you're taking them through their day, what are the things they don't like, and what are the things they do like to do, and maybe do the low interest one first, and then they get to do the one that they like. Okay, so almost can be a reinforcement. You can also switch if there are some activities that require a lot of attention, like let's say data entry, and then some activities that are more physical and moving around, if you can alternate those during the day. So my son's has to do data entry and he has to do binders. So it's, it's kind of a movement and then a focus, and a movement and a focus. But instead of like doing all of them at once, I would switch them up. You can try to learn about their motivators. Do they have any external motivators? Like, in other words, something they really like to do, or a special interest. So if you have their permission to use those motivators, we like to use first then statements to do the reinforcement. Like first you complete your task with the binders, and then you can take a 5-minute break and watch this video or listen to music. Also, if you can try to use different phrases so that you're not constantly saying, no, don't do that now. No, don't do that now. The best is to try to say things in different ways and use their interest to motivate them. And also, we always like to label our praise. So don't just say, oh, great job. You want to say what they did, describe the specific behavior that you liked. I really liked the way you got out your notebook and started working on your own. So you want to try to be specific. That's going to help that person learn what they're doing right. And then also what they're doing wrong. Because we are going to need to give feedback. And all employers give their employees feedback. Feedback is neutral, right? Feedback can be positive or negative. And what feedback does is it helps us to do our job. I've found that many individuals with autism don't get appropriate feedback from the people around them. Because if they're doing inappropriate behavior, most people who are neurotypical, which means not having autism, we're taught not to tell someone what they're doing wrong, right? So we want to be polite. Everyone's polite in social situations, and very rarely will people just tell you, you shouldn't say that, or you shouldn't be negative right now. So the person has to learn somehow. And so it's really, really important for them to get some feedback. You always want to be honest, you want to be kind, but straightforward. And you want to try to make it a two-way conversation. Address facts and address observations. So this is about something that you've observed, or maybe the employer shared with you. We kind of like to have a feedback sandwich. That's why there's a sandwich there, where you're maybe giving positive, then you have your constructive, which might feel negative, and then maybe another positive. So what are they doing well, but what needs to be worked on? And help involve them in identifying what they're going to do differently next time. So that encourages them to work on their own self-advocacy. I want to really stress this, that it's very important also for your employers. I really would encourage you to encourage them to have regular feedback sessions. So I know as job coaches, you're not going to be there all the time, but the employers really should have a regularly scheduled session where they give the employee feedback about what they're doing well and what they need to work on. Because what tends to happen is, with a lot of our individuals with special needs, is people are talking to them and they're like, oh, you're doing so great, because they think it's amazing that this person has these challenges and they're there working. But we've had people who've worked at a place for 6 months, a year, who, as far as they knew, were doing a great job because only people said positive things, and then they got fired because they weren't meeting their performance review. So their standards were not up to standard. So I would just say it's really important to encourage employers to be honest, and help them, give them praise for things they are doing well, but also help them learn what they need to work on. And the reason I say to have it regularly is because our adults tend to get into a routine. I've also worked with people where they've been working there for a long, long time, and there's all these issues that they have that the employer, the boss, has not been working with the person on, and now they bring me in and they want some consultation. Well, this young lady got very upset and stressed out because she's like, why does the boss want to talk to me? They want to meet with me. So it only could be a bad thing because it never had happened. So if you can encourage employers to do it regularly, I think they'll have a better chance for success. So we've already talked some about self-advocacy. And, I just think it's important to reiterate that, you guys are, you as job coaches are really in an amazing position in your ability to reach these individuals and to help prepare them for the future and maybe beyond when they know you, because I know yours is time limited. So if you can, really all the things that we've talked about understanding autism and understanding your person, they really put you in a wonderful position to be able to help them understand themselves. We all know should know, hopefully, what our strengths and weaknesses are. And for individuals with special needs, it's the same thing. If you have challenges and you have special needs, then the way to get your needs met is first knowing them and then how to ask for them. That's really important. So you already have, when you started working with them, or if you're going to start with individuals with autism, you're going to be observing, you're going to get feedback from the boss, you're going to make a list of the challenges that you see. What are the challenges that you see? Okay. And then what are some accommodations that would help them? What are the accommodations that can help overcome them? And what are some tools that can help them? And I'm going to say that for their success in the future, whether they work with you or go on to work independently or get fired and have another job or whatever the situation is, this piece right here, learning what accommodations can help them, is a huge, critical piece. When I've worked with individuals who are hired for special programs, like there are some, I'm sure maybe about the Baptist does an internship called Aspire. They're programs. And so one of the first things they ask you are, what accommodations do you need? Well, many of our adults have no idea. They may not know what accommodations means, first of all, but even if you explain it to them, it's really hard to know what could be an accommodation and what is possible. So all the things that we've talked about are included as accommodations, really. Having visual schedule, helping schedule the day, having a job coach is an accommodation. So if you can help them learn what are the accommodations that help them, you will make them successful in the long run. So part of your job is, again, working them towards independence. And I know we've talked about a variety of levels of functioning. So this prompting is an action that you will use to help them initiate a task or to complete a task. So prompts help you, will help the employee acquire the skills and decrease frustration. So while you're there, you're probably prompting them a lot to get them to start a task maybe, or to help them complete a task or learn a task. So it's important to start with prompts and then eventually fade them, because you want them to be able to function independently, so they're not dependent on you. Okay, so there's different, this is about prompt dependency, right? That's where, and this happens all the time in the field of autism. I met an adult the other day, the mom, they are in the car and the adult's in the car seat, in the back seat, and they pull into a parking lot, and every time she has to physically prompt him to get out of the car. She's getting out, everyone's getting out of the car. So that's an adult who became dependent on that prompt. He's not going to the next step, which is knowing that when the car stops, he is going to get out. right? That's being independent and learning independently what it means. So it's really important that to start by helping them as much as is needed, and then to work on fading. So these are the different types of prompts, okay? And there's a hierarchy, which we'll see on the next slide. So on this slide, where at the top is the biggest prompt, which is the full physical. So that might be actually helping them do the activity and physically guiding them. Partial physical is where maybe you are just getting them started with the hand to start the task. Modeling is a type of prompt, and that's where you or a coworker or a boss demonstrates the skill first, and then they, try to learn it. Verbal cue, okay, so now we're getting, less invasive, these prompts. So verbally is just prompting them to start and telling them, okay, pull out your stapler and let's get the stack, and gestures, of course, which I was just doing while I was doing the verbal. So then a step down from verbal is gesturing. So you might step back, not saying anything, and maybe you just point. You're pointing to the stapler. Positional, so now we're taking a step further because you are not going to be required to physically do this, but you might have placed the materials in a spot in the location so that they complete the task. And then finally, visuals, which we already talked about, and visuals can stand alone. And so if you fade from you having to be there and tell them what to do and physically help them, and fade down to just having the visuals in place so that they don't need you, they can have a visual. So that can stand alone for the rest of their employment, and they can be successful with those visuals. And so here's a picture of it as a hierarchy. And so it's from most intrusive, you can see, is at the bottom of the hierarchy because it's taking the most, and then it goes up the step. And then a natural cue is what we just all know, that, it's time for lunch, everybody's going to lunch, so we just know to go get our lunch. But it's okay that visual prompts, again, sometimes people with autism are going to stick with the visuals, and it's going to be helpful for them. So the way that you fade is important to talk about a little bit. But really, if you go up that hierarchy and you just remind yourself to step back, step back, step back, it will be self-fading. But it's always important to just keep in mind that you want to see what level are they at, okay? So you don't want to assume. So when you first begin, you're going to see where are they in their ability to do the skill and what level of prompting do they require. But then as you go, what tends to happen is we just get used to, we all do as when we're workers, we get used to doing what we're doing. So you want to make sure that you try, if you use a full physical prompt, okay, when you start, the next time try a partial physical prompt. See what happens. Can they get it? Again, if you, and it's same thing with like the verbal and the gestural, if you had a verbal, okay, let's get your supplies together, last time, try just pointing at them and see, is that gonna prompt them to action? So you have to be in charge of finding out what prompt is required. Because as you move on and as you've taught this skill and they've practiced and practiced, they should require less and less the less intrusive prompts, okay? And then also just a reminder at the bottom, always remember to provide a delay. If you try a lesser prompt and it takes a little bit, make sure you're waiting, because we talked about the processing time for people. So, these are just key things to remember. With employees with ASD, don't stigmatize, always try to involve the employee. You're looking at it as the more you can get them involved with asking for their own supports and their own accommodations, the more you're setting them up for future independence. Make sure all the expectations are clear from you, and then also helping to clarify with the employer is important. Create the work systems and use them. Sometimes you're going to go in and to an employer and there's going to be no systems. And so you might have to find out what's the structure of the day and help create it into a structure for that person. Of course, handling questions and challenges. My son always can call or text or email his job coach if there's an issue that he's not aware of. I'm sure all of you have been, if you're working with people during COVID, procedures have all changed and every workplace has a different procedure. So it's very important to be available so that you can help that person understand, because they may not understand it no matter how many times or how many emails they get. They may not read the emails. And then try to always find what are their strengths and what are their contributions. And again, I know you all are amazing because this is your life's work and you are in this field. So we all are there to bring out the strengths and contributions. And I think by understanding, hopefully that you got from this presentation, that by understanding the challenges, focusing on strengths doesn't mean we ignore the challenges, right? It's very important to understand the challenges and be realistic about them, so that we can help them get their needs met, so that then their strengths can shine and their contributions can shine. And then obviously helping the employer to have an accepting environment. And you could consider, for autism, we can go in and we do presentations kind of like this for employers as well. And sometimes for coworkers, depending on the individual's wishes, the adult with ASD, do they want their coworkers to know? You can help foster that accepting environment among the coworkers, but always keeping in mind that this information is confidential. And so it goes back to the wishes of the employee. So I want to just talk about CARD really quickly at the end, and we're right on track. I'll be done in a couple minutes with the talking, and then we'll see if there's questions. We can try to unmute and just have like a discussion a little bit. But for those of you who don't know, CARD is statewide technical assistance project by the Department of Education. And so this is a map. You can see there are 7 CARD centers throughout the state. And the mission is to provide support and assistance with the goal of optimizing the potential of the people with autism, dual sensory impairment, and related disabilities. So here we're at UM-NSU CARD, so we serve Dade, Broward, and Monroe counties, and we have our main offices in the Gables, we have a satellite office in Davie, and we have branch offices in Miami Lakes, Miramar, and Homestead. And what we do is we provide individual and family support, parent and professional education and consultation, programmatic technical assistance and consultation. So we do go out. You can ask for our help to support employers and individuals if they need a consultation to maybe understand some of what we've talked about. We have our adult and transition services. We do community outreach and public awareness. We do trainings in the community like we're doing now. We train at a lot of schools as well, and there's research opportunities as well. So anyone with an ASD diagnosis, including the old diagnoses that we talked about, and then dual sensory impairments with other disabling conditions. So that is it for the presentation. I think I can email out the PowerPoint as a PDF when we're done, and I'll send it all to you all. And so this last screen, if you have clients that you think could use our services at CARD, this is a QR code that families can use, and then it pulls up a pre-registration form so that if families or individuals, adults with autism complete that form, we reach out to them to set up an intake appointment. So I'm going to stop sharing, I think, and